Hello again everybody, and we're now going to leave classical Greece and we're going to return to Rome, particularly Republican Rome in the 2nd century BC, one of the periods of Roman history that indirectly is the most influential of all. So, Rome had been fighting against Carthage for supremacy in the Mediterranean for decades, and after 3 separate outbreaks of war, finally, after what's called the Third Punic War, Carthage had indeed been defeated, and as Cato insisted, the Roman politician Cato insisted, Carthage had been destroyed. In one incident at the end of that, there was a young soldier called Tiberius Gracchus, a very well-connected young soldier, although from a plebeian family, and he was the first to scale the walls of Carthage and won great distinction for doing that. So he was revered by his fellow soldiers, and as you will see, this has some importance in his story. At the end of the Third Punic War, many of the soldiers who'd been fighting returned to Italy to find that their land, along with the land of quite a lot of other people in Italy, had been occupied by the aristocracy. This had been going on for some time, perhaps 40-50 years at least, so there was more than one generation of occupation, but basically aristocrats had taken public land and made it their own. And this had led to the Italian peasantry, who were the backbone of the legions ultimately, being displaced from the land and being unemployed, and there was a big drift towards major towns, especially towards the city of Rome. But this meant that there was a big demand on food supply, and the prices of corn, especially on which the Roman diet was based, went up hugely. So there's a problem of unemployment, you've got a lot of demobbed soldiers at a loose end, and you've got very high grain prices. Well, this is clearly an explosive political mix. Gracchus was elected as tribune of the people for 133 BC. And this meant there are 4 ranks, if you like, in the Roman magisterial setup. And one of these is tribune of the people, and the idea was that you represented the interests of the people against the domination of the aristocracy. So Gracchus decided that he was going to propose some land reforms, and these included taking land back from people who had occupied a very large amount and redistributing it to former soldiers and back to the small farmers of Italy. And obviously this was going to be pretty popular with the urban poor and also with the rural poor, but it's not very popular with the aristocracy, who'd been living off other people's land for some time. Gracchus made a great speech, which is recorded by the historian as follows. The wild beasts that roam over Italy have their dens and holes to lurk in, but men who fight and die for our country enjoy the common air and light and nothing else. It's their lot to wander with their wives and children, homeless and houseless, over the face of the earth. And when our generals appeal to their soldiers before a battle to defend their ancestors' tombs and their temples against the enemy, their words are a lie and a mockery, for not a man in their audience possesses a family altar. Not one out of all of these Romans owns an ancestral tomb. The truth is that they fight and die to protect the wealth and luxury of others. They're called the masters of the world, but they do not possess a single clod of earth that is truly their own. Well, revolutionary words, and the aristocracy, whose interests are represented in the Senate, really didn't like this at all. So they sought to delay this and a number of other proposals by Gracchus, which led to his seeking re-election for the following year. Now, there are problems with that constitutionally, because it was only under exceptional circumstances that was supposed to happen, and this didn't really qualify as that. So Tiberius Gracchus was kind of going against the constitution in order to enact what seemed to most people perfectly fair land reforms. However, to cut to the chase on this, the Senate passed a motion to say that they were not happy with this, and that action was going to be taken against Tiberius Gracchus and his followers. They passed a motion to save the state. The consul, one of the consuls of the day, said that he would not act illegally and murder a Roman citizen, by which he meant Gracchus. However, the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of the Roman state, Scipio Nasica, and other senators armed themselves with clubs and went up to the Capitoline Hill, which is where Tiberius Gracchus and his followers were holding a meeting of the people. 300 people, along with Tiberius Gracchus, were bludgeoned to death. Gracchus had tried to flee, but he was killed near the temple of Capitoline Jupiter. There were huge implications for Rome with this series of events. The first of them was that the class struggle between the landed aristocracy and everybody else was now clearly out in the open. The idea that political violence would be seen as legitimate was laid bare. Some land reforms, however, were enacted in the following 10 years, and 10 years after all this came the brother of Tiberius Gracchus, who was called Gaius Gracchus, and more about him in my next talk. However, a later historian called Velleius Paterculus, this is what he judged about this series of events. This was the first occasion in the city of Rome when the blood of Roman citizens was shed and recourse was had to the sword, in both cases without fear of punishment. Thereafter law was overwhelmed by force, and greater respect was accorded to greater power. Civil strife, which in the past had been resolved by agreement, was settled by the sword. So wrote Velleius Paterculus, not quite 100 years later. Well, what can we say about all this? The first thing is necessary for reforms need to happen, and the forces of reaction who resist these unreasonably it's going to cause a problem. The second thing is concentration of land ownership in the hands of a very few may very well be disastrous, particularly if that land has been enclosed, to take an English legal term, illegally or under dubious circumstances. It's amazing the percentage of land in the UK which is owned by a very small number of people. When it's concluded that law has been overwhelmed by force and that civil strife, which has previously been resolved by agreement, is settled by the sword, we all have cause to worry. It's interesting just in the history of politics that the Labour Party Tribune group, a left-wing group within the Labour Party, looks back to these events and the role of tribunes within the Roman state, but also that in the USA, the Capitol Hill and the Senate, the ruling body, if you like, the sovereign body of the American state, take their names also from Rome. But isn't it interesting that it's the Senate, not the tribunes, in the USA? More on land reform and the Gracchi next time.